Hi, my name's Pat Wesolowski. After homeschooling my 9 children for over 32 years, I'm finally finished. Now I'm the homeschool specialist at Bryan College. Bryan College is named after William Jennings Bryan, who volunteered to be on the prosecution team of the Scopes monkey trial, one of the most important trials in our history. I put together a presentation on this trial, and I hope you enjoy it. What do all these have in common? The ACLU, conspiracy, entrepreneurship, a boy named Sue, a small town, and famous attorneys. The Scopes trial. This is one of the most important trials in our history, and it happened in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925. It all began when a zealous science teacher in a small town in Tennessee broke the law in order to teach a classroom filled with students that man was descended from a lower animal form. Men from the law enforcement, along with irate parents and the news media, storm into the classroom, arrest the teacher, and haul him off to jail. That is not at all how it happened, but if you got your information from the movie Inherit the Wind, that's probably what you've learned. Unfortunately, if you learned about the Scopes trial from that movie, you've been misinformed. A document that compares the movie with what actually happened at this trial is available at this link. It really all began in 1925 when the Tennessee legislature passed the Butler Act, which prohibited the teaching that man was evolved from animals. The ACLU in New York advertised for a willing defendant who would admit to breaking this law. George Rapollier and the town fathers of Dayton saw the ad and thought a trial would be a great way to put Dayton on the map. The principal of the school, who was also the science teacher, refused to take part in this scheme. After all, he was married and he had 3 children. A local teacher and coach, John Scopes, agreed that he would admit to teaching evolution in order to be a test case for the ACLU. So Scopes was arrested by Sue Hicks, the city attorney, and the boy named Sue. Bryan College professor Richard Cornelius, who authored 18 articles about the Scopes trial, says with some understatement, it was more a trial of ideas than most other trials have been or could be. It's the ideas that have made the trial so significant. Dr. Samuel Youngs, professor at Bryan College, writes, this trial definitely was ideological in foundation, cultural perception, and ramifications. The Butler Act material was, on both sides, the gateway through which evolution could be advanced by getting the act struck down or thwarted by upholding the act and decrying evolution in educational contexts. The law was not struck down until 1967. As you and I both know, we have now come full circle. These are the players which we'll soon learn more about. John Scopes, George Rapollier, F.E. Robinson and Sue Hicks, William Jennings Bryan, Clarence Darrow, George Ralston, and H.L. Mencken. They all played an important part in this trial. John Scopes. He was actually a football coach, and he was a teacher at the local high school. He was a bachelor, and he did substitute in science class. He couldn't actually recall whether he taught evolution or not, but he was willing to say he did for the sake of the trial. He never went to jail, he didn't lose his job, and he didn't have to pay his fine. George Rapollier was a native of New York, a manager of the Cumberland Coal and Iron Company. F.E. Robinson was a Dayton resident who owned the drugstore, and he was president of the school board. He was known as the hustling druggist. He's the entrepreneur in this story. And then Sue Hicks. He was a Dayton attorney on the prosecuting team. He was the man who inspired Johnny Cash's song, A Boy Named Sue. His mother died shortly after childbirth, and so his father named him after his mother, Sue. Judge Ralston. Judge T. Ralston, the judge in the Scopes trial, was a popular local attorney thrown into the limelight during the Scopes trial. It's said that his rulings favored the prosecution more often than the defense. Ralston was a Christian who quoted scripture during the trial, and he opened the proceedings with prayer when clergy was present. Some are of the opinion that Ralston knew much more about what was going on during the trial than he let on. I'll explain that a little later. H.L. Mencken. He was a journalist, a satirist, a cultural critic, and a scholar. He was regarded as one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. But he was also an admirer of Friedrich Nietzsche. He was an agnostic, perhaps an atheist. He was racist and anti-Semitic. He was the one who suggested Darrow represent Scopes at the trial. He was snarky, witty, and insulting in his writings. Clarence Darrow. He volunteered to represent Scopes after Mencken suggested he'd have the opportunity to beat Bryan in court. He was famous for the Leopold and Loeb trial, among many others. He was a vocal agnostic, perhaps atheist. He was actually held in contempt of court at the Scopes trial. His main goal was to appeal this case to higher courts. And then there was William Jennings Bryan. He was born in 1860, 1 year before the Civil War began. He was known to contact men with differing beliefs in order to understand their arguments. He ran for president 3 times. He campaigned for peace, prohibition, and suffrage. He became President Wilson's Secretary of State. He was nicknamed the Great Commoner. He was the most popular speaker of the Chautauqua Circuit for 25 years. He was famous for his Cross of Gold speech, supporting coins of silver and ending the gold standard. Here's some interesting information about the trial. This was the first trial actually covered by radio. Both William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow volunteered to counsel the prosecution and the defense. The town welcomed the attorneys, reporters, and out-of-town guests. There was a circus-like atmosphere around town with banners, vendors, and even trained chimps on display. It was so hot and so many were in the courtroom that the trial was moved out of doors on day 7. With the exception of zoologist Maynard Metcalf, the scientists were not allowed to testify on the stand. So the judge did allow one scientist to testify, but he was trying to prove that evolution was true, and the judge realized that was not germane to this case. John Scopes had been accused of teaching evolution in the schools. That is all that was on trial. Did he break the Butler Act? Evolution was not on trial, so after the first scientist testified, the judge said, okay, we're not going to have any more scientists come and testify. You can put your documents in the transcript if you'd like, but we're not going to present them. So many of the scientists did include their documents in the transcript of the trial, and it's funny now, almost 100 years later, looking at their arguments for evolution and seeing how unconvincing they really are. Journalist H.L. Mencken did not even observe much of the trial, staying instead at a cooler resort on Lookout Mountain. During the trial, more than 200 reporters wrote more than 2 million words for more than 2,000 newspapers across the nation. William Jennings Bryan agreed to testify for the defense. This doesn't usually take place. When the judge asked Darrow if he had any more witnesses, he said he would like to call William Jennings Bryan. And the judge said, you don't call the prosecuting attorney on the stand as your witness. And Bryan said, wait, I will be willing to do that if he will let me question him as well. And Darrow said, okay, I'll do that. Well, Darrow was very careful with the questions he asked Bryan, and he was trying to make him look like a religious fanatic or someone who didn't really know what he believed or what he believed was crazy. So he asked him questions like, where did Cain get his wife? Did a whale really swallow Jonah? Did the sun stand still? And Bryan had good answers for most of those questions. And then, after Bryan testified, before he could question Darrow, before he could give his closing arguments, Darrow said, I want to call the trial to the end. Let's just call in the jury and get a verdict. And he did that for several reasons. Number 1, Darrow wouldn't get to put him on the stand as a witness. Number 2, Bryan would never get to present his closing argument, which was probably quite persuasive. And number 3, the trial would be over and Darrow could appeal the case. So they called in the jury and asked for a verdict, and the jury declared Scopes guilty. The judge set Scopes' fine at $100. Now, this is where many think Judge Ralston knew more about what was going on than one would think, because he was not the one who was supposed to set the fine. That was supposed to be set by the jury. It's interesting that after he set the fine, Darrow offered to pay it, the ACLU offered to pay it, the Founding Fathers offered to pay it, and Bryan offered to pay it. So Scopes wasn't going to have to pay that $100 fine no matter what. But because the judge was the one that set the fine and not the jury, it caused the verdict to be set aside on appeal. So Darrow never got to appeal this case to a higher court. Bryan didn't get to give his closing statement, and he died 5 days later while taking a nap. So the Founding Fathers had thought that the publicity would bring tourists and that tourists would spend money. Well, it did bring tourists, lots of tourists, but they didn't spend very much money. Most of them, if they were going to be hungry, brought their food from home and didn't spend it in town. The chairman of the school board was Frank Earl Robinson, F.E. Robinson, the one who called himself the hustling druggist, and he was instrumental in making money many different ways. He published a booklet entitled Why Dayton, of all places. He had monkey souvenirs that he sold in his store. Mindy, the trained chimp, came in and was in a photo shoot drinking a Coke out of a glass at the drugstore, after which they broke the glass and threw it away because they knew nobody would want to drink after a monkey. If you watch the movie inherit the win. It makes the citizens of Dayton look like yokels. It makes them look like they hated, spat on, burned in effigy Clarence Darrow. It makes them look like they were very bigoted and hateful people. But after the trial, if you read these remarks made by Clarence Darrow, who was John Scope's defense attorney, and H.L. Mencken, who was the journalist known for his insulting writing, you will find out the truth of the matter is the folks in Dayton were not ill-behaved at all. Clarence Darrow said, "As far as the people of Tennessee are concerned, I don't know as I was ever in a community in my life where my religious ideas differed as widely from the great mass as I have found them since I've been in Tennessee. Yet I came here a perfect stranger, and I can say what I have said before, that I have not found upon anybody's part, any citizen here in this town or outside, the slightest discourtesy. I have been treated better, kindlier, and more hospitably than I fancied would have been the case in the North, and that's due largely to the ideas that Southern people have, and they are perhaps more hospitable than we are up North." And then H.L. Mencken wrote, "The town, I confess, greatly surprised me. I expected to find a squalid Southern village with darkies snoozing on the horse blocks, pigs rooting under the houses, and the inhabitants full of hookworm and malaria. What I found was a country town full of charm and even beauty." If you go to Dayton today, they still hold cases in the courthouse and you can visit it. In the basement, there's a free museum. William Jennings Bryan, who died in 1925, while he was in Dayton, looked up at a hill and said that would be a great place to put a school that would teach truth from a biblical perspective. 5 years after his death, some men came to Mrs. Bryan who wanted to start a college and name it after Bryan, and when they asked, should it be built in Chicago, where Bryan grew up, in Washington, where he served, or in Dayton, where the Scopes trial took place, she chose Dayton. So in 1930, Bryan College was built in Dayton, Tennessee. Here's some additional information and resources. Feel free to look them up and contact me if you have any questions. We'd love to have you come and visit Bryan College. We have several preview days each semester. We also have a scholarship event for seniors who've been accepted to Bryan. This is a free event, and each student who attends receives an additional $500 to a full ride. If you'd like more information about that, contact me. We have a very affordable dual enrollment program. We have many scholarships that stack. We have a brand new engineering school, and students who come to Bryan and graduate with a 3.5 GPA can earn a master's degree tuition free. I would love to send you a packet of information. Send me an email if you'd like that. pat.wesolowski@bryan.edu. Thanks so much.